The left is trying to destroy this 19-year-old man's life for supposedly doing a burnout over a LGBT mural. I wonder if this mural had been a Trump picture or Go Trump 2024 or something, and some foaming at the mouth liberal had done a burnout. I wonder what would happen to him. Let me see. Maybe a ticket, if that. Let's take a look at this.
For being one of the only journalists to cover this completely insane story.
It's disgusting. It shouldn't be happening in Florida. We talk about Florida being the freedom state, and yet somebody who may or may have not been doing a burnout on a political mural is being charged with a felony and is potentially going to have his life destroyed. Anthony, why is it just you who's speaking about this issue? Why aren't other Republicans getting in line with this?
Well, sadly, the old mindset of the Republican Party, which is to just play defense and only act on something when you're forced to, is really hurting, especially when it comes to these new fights where the left is always finding new ways to exercise their power. And what they've done here, obviously, is say, okay, well, let's take basic traffic laws. Interpret them in a completely insane, exaggerated manner in order to politically target people we disagree with. So, there was a trans rainbow flag depicted on the city sidewalk, and so they want to make an example out of this young kid. You look at a picture of him; he kind of looks Republican. Drives a big truck. He's the perfect person to slaughter and to attack. And the Republicans are doing nothing about it because really they're still afraid. They're always going to be afraid of the radical left, and we just have too many cowards in office who are unwilling to speak up. But speaking about the specifics of this is really actually quite appalling what they've done because they're charging him with two crimes. One of the
Mhm.
crimes is reckless driving, which, by the way, you would never ever charge with somebody for a basic burnout. And like you talked about a moment ago, and even before the show, it's even arguable whether he really burned out. If you look, his speed is roughly similar to some of the other cars coming through the same intersection. So even that is a complete and total stretch. But what's worse and more legally untenable than the reckless driving charge, which once again you would usually never bring in a case like this if it wasn't politically motivated, is this the felony charge that they're bringing in this case, which is a third degree felony of destruction of property more than $1,000. So the reason it's so ludicrous that they're arguing that is the paint that they've tossed onto the city streets at this point is no longer ascertainable property owned by the city. It was a third party group facilitated by the city to put it there, but it's basically understood that it's going to be driven over and destroyed over, repeated driving over the course of years. And so for them to say that he actually destroyed it, which he didn't, in requiring them to basically start it over means that it's property, that there's an official victim here. And those are just not elements of this crime that could ever be proved. So it's a completely absurd crime. Any good lawyer would tell him that. Of course, there's a lot of liberal lawyers in Delray, so I'm praying that this young man doesn't have some terrible legal advisor telling him to take a plea, like obviously, apparently, a previous person had been charged with a similar crime and had taken a plea on this absurd crime. Because it's clear to me that if he fought it and it went to the appellate level, he would win on appeal because the elements simply cannot be met. But long story short, this whole thing is completely insane. He should never be even charged with this. And it's really deafening the silence from the governor and the legislature thus far, because the governor right now could pardon him entirely, realizing the political nature of this thing. If
Mhm.
anything, just do an outside third party investigation, go look at the emails, see that it's obviously politically motivated. I'm sure the groups who told the state attorney in that area, who's also a very left wing Democrat, if you didn't know, to pick this kid up and charge him with a felony. The email traffic's going to show the political prejudice and nature of this whole thing. And the governor could take a look at that and fix the situation in 2 seconds. Also, and not to get off on a rant here, but if I could add, the legislature should have prohibited these types of crass political displays on our city streets years ago anyways. I mean, where are the Republicans saying that these cities should not be allowed to paint these provocative, crazy, in your face, aggressive leftist propaganda symbols on our city streets to begin with? It's a completely unsafe symbol. I think obviously an older driver looking at it wouldn't know if it was a stop sign or some sort of insignia telling them to do something or not. And so therefore it should have never been there to begin with, which is another argument of why they need to take action. I know that was a mouthful, but there's just a lot going on in this case, and so far just total silence from the Republicans in power.
Yeah, it's disgraceful. I mean, I told you I reached out to Governor Ron DeSantis' office and Ashley Moody's office, and nobody wants to comment on this issue at all, which I think is disturbing because, 19-year-old kids shouldn't be having their lives destroyed over a mural. I'm sure, and maybe I'll just do it actually, put in a request to build a mural in the other side of the street for President Donald Trump and see if that gets approved by the boards here. And if it does, and anyone, drives over it and causes tire marks, I'm going to want them charged with felonies and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But you also cited another guy who was arrested for the crime back in 2021, and the crime I say sarcastically. He was charged. He actually took a plea deal. And the funny part about this whole thing is the prosecutors wanted this man who suffers from mental health issues to go to prison for a month. And then the big political groups here in Florida, the big liberal political groups wanted him in prison for a year for driving over it because he drove over it with a Trump flag in the back of his car, which is obviously a hate crime. And then they even want Dylan charged with a hate crime, which is even more bizarre. It's all disturbing. It doesn't seem to be going well, though, because Republicans don't want to stick their neck out for any of these people. And so I'm a little concerned that they're actually going to get their way with this kid. And so for those at home, before we pivot to our next topic, I want to remind our audience that Dylan is looking for help with his legal fees. So you can head over to Give, Send, Go, and then you could look up supporting Dylan Brewer. He is looking for donations. Tim Pool actually was kind enough yesterday to donate $10,000 to his legal defense. So that was very, very kind of him.